My name is Justin, and I am the director, partner, and co-founder of a production company called Running Wild Media. And we basically set to inspire conservation by creating impactful visual story of the natural world. And what that means is we try to create a lot of change in the communities and the areas we work with. And to do that change, we use visual stories such as films, photos, articles, photo galleries, artistic means, and everything like that. And we'll get into more about what that means later on. I'm also the International Communications and Outreach Program Officer for an organization called Planet Indonesia. And what we do is we take an human rights-based approach to nature conservation in Indonesia. And we have a lot of really exciting programs going on there, and a lot of really good work is there as well. And we use storytelling a lot in order to reach the communities and the stakeholders that we work with. So we got about a 45-minute workshop today. Now we got about probably 3 minutes at this point. But what we're going to cover is storytelling, audience, delivering your story, and as you watch this live or if you watch it afterwards, I'd encourage you to take out a piece of paper and a pen and kind of do some of the activities that we have outlined here, because that's going to help you really craft your story and identify the audience that you're trying to work with and drive the mission and the goals that you are trying to do as your organization or through your work. And so, yeah, it'll be definitely a good way to kind of follow along as well. And then you'll have something at the very end that you can use to kind of craft your story. So let's get into it. So storytelling. Storytelling is literally the oldest form of sharing information in the world. And if you think about it, the language was formed in order to share stories. That's how people shared lessons, they shared risks, they shared where to go in order to find food. It was all oriented around that story. And that's what really gave people a sense of the world around them. It was being able to experience it and then share it with someone else. You know, we see storytelling happening in the animal kingdom as well through different communications, vocalizations. You even have bees that go out and bring back directions on how to find flowers by doing certain dances to other bees. That's all storytelling. And so it's not just unique to people, it's all sorts of organisms that use storytelling in order to communicate. So that's really at the core of communication. You know, a good story connects with people, you know, regardless of the content. And so you want to convey emotion, you want to make people feel, you want to make people act when you're telling them a story. And that's when the information was appropriately delivered. That's when someone knows now how to do something or what to do because of the information in the story that you told them. And a good story always includes a conflict. So every time, you know, you're telling somebody about your mission or you're telling somebody about the work that you're doing, you want to have that conflict, that challenge, and then you tell them the solution to get over that challenge, what your unique process is to give them the solution. You have characters in that, you know, the people that you are helping, the donors that you are working with, the funders that you're hoping that would fund your project. Those are your characters within your story. Your heroes, you know, that's your audience, the people that you've identified as your specific audience and who you want to connect with. And then you've got settings, you know, where you're doing the work. And then your resolution is at the end of your story. That's where you really kind of describe, you know, the solutions to that challenge that you brought up, to that conflict that you shared at the very beginning. The solution is how your characters and your audience or your funders are going to help you overcome that challenge that you had sort of expressed in the very beginning of your story. So why conservation or storytelling and conservation? Because conservation is a people problem. I got into conservation, and the first thing that I used to do was do field research on wildlife. And so what that looked like is I'd go out and I'd catch turtles, and I'd go catch salamanders, and I'd catch bugs, and I'd collect data on them. And I thought I was doing conservation. But after a while, I realized that that's not necessarily what conservation is. That's informing how conservation works, collecting important data on wildlife populations, behavior, ecology. That's all important for conservation, but that's not conservation. Conservation is working with people. And so like I just mentioned, working with people is all about storytelling. You know, you can give people facts, you can give people information, but as we all know, people don't necessarily like to digest that kind of stuff. And so giving them a true story to give them all that information and to deliver them and to put that person in that story along with you, that's how you connect with the person. And when you pair that with conservation, that's how you're going to communicate and you're going to get your maximal participation. So using storytelling and conservation is helpful because it can influence behaviors of stakeholders. It can increase participation in your projects, and it can connect with fundraisers and sponsors. Now we're going to focus on conservation here a little bit because that's the world I live in, but this is extremely applicable to all kinds of projects, anywhere from the economy to medical services, conservation. Storytelling is essential in connecting people around your mission, your goals, and getting them to support what you're doing. So that's kind of why we chose storytelling. And that's why I chose storytelling as my profession. I was a wildlife biologist, and then I became a teacher, and then I realized that educating people about wildlife and conservation is best done through storytelling. So there's all kinds of exciting methods of storytelling. How you tell that story is up to you. And everybody has a completely unique story to tell. And that's what makes this really exciting. One person's not going to tell the same story another person is. Even if two people did the same thing and experienced the same event, both of those stories are going to be completely different, and you're going to connect with people in a different way. And so that's not a bad thing, that is a good thing. And I think that can be used strategically in your organization or your mission to help connect to those different people that you're trying to. And so there's all these different things you could do. You could do a podcast to tell your story. You could do a book. You could do a video. You could do a public performance. You know, theater is a good one. Music is a good one. Videos, or I said that, art pieces, gardening, and we could get even more ridiculous. Balloon animals, poems, all kinds of things. And so that really depends on what you're interested in and what your talents are as an individual. And so for me, the reason why I chose storytelling around films, photography, and writing is just what I was interested in. As a kid, I had a camera, and I would go out into the forest, and I'd always go out and take photos of lizards and frogs and all kinds of fun and exciting things. And to do that, I, really, really enjoyed learning how to do photography. And so I just latched onto that, and that became the thing that I wanted to do. And so I focused on that, and that's what Running Wild Media does, is they focus primarily on films, photography, writing, articles, that kind of thing. So the next big thing with an audience, and what that is it changes depending on what your goals are. But to start, there is no such thing as a general public audience. A lot of people say that they want to drive impact somewhere and their audience is the general public. That is no such thing. There's no way you can split an audience that is the general public. That is huge. So it's a group of people that you want to interact with. That's a specific audience. So if you're trying to create a goal or a mission, or you're trying to do something with your organization, your audience could quite literally be one politician, or it could be a group of knitting grandmothers, could be your friends, could be people who live on a particular beach. Really, it's about the stakeholders whose behavior that you want to change. So when you're thinking about how you want to tell your story, you really got to think about who your audience is, who you're trying to tell that story to, because that's going to allow you to understand what kind of story you're going to tell, how you're going to be telling that story. So getting the most out of your audience, you want to get them to do something for you. That's the whole point of creating change. Being a change maker is getting a group of people to do something based on what you want them to do. And so you want them to act a certain way, you want them to donate. It could be a wide array of different things. But you need to have a very focused and very specific task for that audience to do, because if it gets a little bit unorganized, or you're not clear in what your expectations are while delivering your story to your audience can get confused. And so having something that's focused and specific is very good. Usually I say about 3 asks or 3 points Anything more than that, it's going to become overwhelming for an audience. And so you want to try to keep yourself into one or two very specific things that your audience can do in order to help them or to help you with your mission or your goals. There are a lot of pitfalls with not knowing your audience. So if you're trying to tell a story and you're trying to create change somewhere in the world and implement your goals and your mission, and you don't understand your audience, it could have a big impact on what you're hoping to accomplish. So there's a lot of things that come with that, like not using words that your audience is familiar with. If you use a lot of jargon that is familiar to the field, but not necessarily to your audience, you're going to lose them in your story. If you make assumptions about what they know, or you make assumptions about their gaps in knowledge, that's going to create a difficult situation in telling your story and getting them to do the thing that you want them to do. If you give them too little detail or too much detail about certain topics in your story, you also might lose them. So what the best thing to do to understand your audience is to talk to them, is to understand them and to listen to them. So really talking to them starts with listening. So you listen to your audience, you understand where they're coming from, you meet them at where they are, you ask them questions. You can formalize it by giving them surveys so they can give you the information that you need in order to understand the impact that you're hoping to have. And that's really how you get to know your audience. And so using that is a really key point in creating a story to help you drive your mission and drive impact and make the change that you're hoping to change. So this is a good chance for everyone to pull out a sheet of notebook paper. I don't think that we're going to be doing this in real time. So if you're watching this session after the fact, then what we'll do, or what you can do, is pull out a piece of notebook paper at this point and answer some of these questions while you're listening to the rest of the presentation. So I know this is all stuff that you're going to know already, but it's really helpful to have it written down. Where is your project located? So you write that down on your piece of paper. Geographically, where is your project located? And then you can write down, what are your goals? What are some of the goals that your organization or your impact project has? Write those down right next to where your project is located. And then the next one is, who do you interact with most for your project? Think about who the people are that you're going to be interacting with the most, where they are, what they're going to be doing, what their demographic is, how old they are, that kind of stuff is what you want to be thinking about. Another question to ask yourself is, how do you interact with the people in your project? So how do you normally interact with them? Through email, through text, through presentations, online, in person, in the theater, on film screens? How do you interact with the people of your project? And then where do you interact with them? And so that links back to where your project is located. Where do you interact with them? What kind of interface do you use? What kind of media? All of that sort of links together. That's going to let you understand kind of what your audience is, where they are, who they are, what they're doing. And then you can follow that up with some of the surveys, or by listening to see what your audience is saying or thinking, what their challenges are, and how you can solve their challenges. So keep that in mind, write it down. It'll help you kind of keep organized as we move on. So the next part is delivering your message. So we talked about storytelling and how important storytelling is and how it could be used in conservation or whatever field that you're in, how storytelling can be used to communicate with people. And we talked about what an audience is, because that's who you're going to be communicating to. Your audience is going to be the people that you want to do something with, or have them do something on your behalf in order for you to implement your mission. So this is all about delivering that message to your audience that you had just decided who they are. So the best way to deliver your message to an audience depends on their needs and your talents. And so, like I said, you're going to be trying to identify what their needs are by listening to them, by meeting them at where they are, by doing surveys, by talking to them. And then you got to look at yourself. You got to do some deep diving to figure out what your delivery message is going to be, or what your delivery system is going to be. It's got to be creative. It's got to be exciting. It's got to be impactful and engaging. The creativity and exciting all comes from your passion, and it's going to be coming from your talent. So you're going to use that and then you're going to pair that with telling a story. So there's all kinds of methods that you can use to tell a story, and it really just kind of relies on your personality. You could be goofy, you could be funny, you could be dramatic, you could be serious. There's all different ways you can do it, and it really comes down to your own personality. For me, I don't really like being super goofy and super funny. So what I do is I use being a director to make films and edit the films together and allow the films and the characters in my film to do the talking. But you, if you're into comedy, you could be a stand-up comedian and you could deliver your story with stand-up comedy. And you could deliver that story to the audience that you have chosen as the audience that you want to impact through the work that you're doing. And while you're telling that story, you're telling the audience all about the challenges to the work that you're doing or the challenges to their daily lives. You're meeting them where they are. You're showing them the conflict of your story. And then you're going through all of the different story elements while delivering a fun and engaging comedic experience. So it really is whatever you make it. It really depends on what you're interested in, what your personality is, what you like best is how you're going to deliver the story. So tips to telling your story. One of the best things to do is you can go right in it as a hot start. So that's a popular term used. That means you're going to get right to your story. You're going to go right into setting the scene, the plot, the conflict. You're not going to stand on stage, or you're not going to go into your video and talk about, the intros. Hi, hello, welcome. I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much. That, this, that, and the other. You're going to go right into telling somebody a story. And then you're going to avoid going right into stats from the get-go. You're going to get them something really interesting, some interesting look that an audience might not necessarily get to see often or interact with much. So you're going to give them that interesting hot start, and then you're going to give them the hook that's going to bring them into your story. Then you introduce the challenges and then everything else that kind of comes on beyond it. You want to make your story emotional. You want to make it personal, because that's what people really engage with. People like emotion. When you're trying to express something and you're angry or you're sad, people latch on to that. Especially if you cry in your story, people really latch on to crying. So if you're making a video and you have an interview and someone's crying in the interview, people tend to really, really latch on to that because it makes it that emotional, personal story. And then use your preferred method of storytelling. Like I just mentioned, there's all those different methods and things that you can use to tell your story. Now, an interesting thing you could do is you are the guide in this story and your audience is the hero. So you could take your audience on this journey through your story and tell them all the things that they need to know. And your audience, without them, the story is incomplete. And that's really, really the best way that you're going to get the interaction and the change that you want from your audience, because they see and they hear this story and they realize that they're the heroes and their participation in your story is what is going to allow you, the guide or the organization, to overcome those challenges that you've expressed at the very beginning. And they're a part of that solution, and they're going to feel obligated to be that solution, so then that you can use them in order to drive impact, do whatever it is you want to do. If you want them to start recycling, that's how you set them up in the story, and that's how they help the guide and they overcome the solution, and that's how they become the hero. If it is to climb a mountain, you can ask them to do that. Whatever it is. If it's to donate money, your audience is the hero because they're going to donate that money to allow you to impact that solution, to address the challenge and impact that solution, so that you can go and you can make the world a better place, as we all are hoping to do. At the end of your story, you always want to have a call to action. You cannot end a story without a call to action. You have that resolution, and then the call to action is where you lay your ask. So call to action is a term used for when you ask your audience or whoever you're telling your story to a specific thing. A call to action could be, please donate to this website. Please start recycling. Please do this on behalf of everyone, of turtles everywhere, That's the ask, and that's what's going to get your audience to go do something. And like I mentioned, you want it to be very simple. You want to have someone remember the one ask that you had them do. Instead of giving them 5 to 10 different things, ask them one thing, and they're most likely going to do that. You also, in my experience, you want to have some sort of a hopeful message with your story. You want to have a clear solution to these challenges, so that an audience can feel like they can do something. A lot of the times I see in media very negative and sad stories, and that just means that in my experience, audiences will leave not feeling too good about the situation and not feeling like they can really do a whole lot of anything to impact what's going on. And so having a hopeful message is something that you can use to make people feel like it's working elsewhere, other people are doing it, it's got a positive trend. And so if they jump on board as well, it's going to keep going in a positive direction. And that's the hopeful message you want to do. If you tell someone that, everything's bleak and dire and there's really no hope, then your ask is going to fall pretty short because they're not really going to have an interest or motivation in order to support the thing that you're trying to do because they already feel terrible about it and they're likely not going to do it. So keep that in mind. You want to have a clear call to action, very concise, but you also want to have a hopeful story or a hopeful solution to a challenge that you brought up in your story so that people feel like they can contribute to it. And lastly, a big, big tip for telling your stories: be yourself. Be yourself. Don't try to imitate somebody else. Don't try to imitate something you've seen on social media. Be yourself. Be genuine. Be authentic, because that's what people want to see. They want to see your personality. They want to see how you react to things. They want to see you. And so be yourself when you're telling your story. The story is about you and an impact or some change that you want to make. Be genuine. Be you. If your story is about another person or a character that you've chosen, perhaps it's someone who has experienced the challenge that you're trying to address and they've used your solution and it's a success story. Use that character, but also allow that character to express themselves genuinely, and that's where people are going to connect. And it's also important to choose really good characters for that story, because if you have an audience, you want to choose a character that is very similar to that audience so that when you highlight them and you use them in your story and you show them and how they're acting and how they're overcoming challenges and implementing the solutions that your organization has come up with, you want a whole audience to look at that situation and be like, wow, I can do that too. That person's like me. Or you could show a bunch of different characters if you have a diverse audience, so that an audience can look like, oh, I can do that. I can implement that in my community, or I could do that behavior change, or I could do something. And that's really what's going to cause the change to happen. It's really, really exciting when that happens. So consider the size of your audience and the distribution, how geographically dispersed they are, because that's going to help inform how you deliver your story, how you're going to deliver that message, how easy it is for that message to get out there. And like I said, end on a positive note. Never ask your audience to do more than 3 things, but think about the size and the distribution. So we're going to go back to our notes. You've got your organization, your goals, all that kind of stuff there. So now I want you to think about 3 art or storytelling forms that you like best. What you like, the kind of things that you notice when you go out. If you're going to art museums, if you're going to movies, those are things to consider. Those are the things that you like the best. So for me, I really like going to the movies. I really like going to photo galleries. I really like, looking at photos online. And so that's kind of where I am, the photography, the videography sort of field. But it might totally be different for someone else. It could be painting, could be cooking, so just think of 3 different art forms that you like best. And now list 3 things that you're good at. I like eating, but I'm not good at cooking. So probably not going to use that as one of my things, but try to pair things. I really like films and I really like making films. And I feel like I'm good at making films. So those pair well with trying to implement a story. So write those down, consider them, think about it, and then write it down. And then think about what your audience would like. And this could come out during the survey when you originally ask your audience, what they're into, what their challenges are. When you start listening, trying to engage with your audience, think about what they would like. Would they like to go see a movie? Are they able to go see a movie? Is your audience in an area that doesn't have internet or a good reception to where a movie just might not be the thing, but maybe bringing in some pieces of art could possibly be the way that you help visualize the data that you're trying to convey? So think about that because that really has a huge influence on what kind of art you're going to actually use and what delivery method you're going to use to help tell your story to drive the impact that you're hoping to get. And then write down what you're asking your audience to do. Like I said, no more than 3 things, ideally 1. That's your call to action, your big ask. What do you want your audience to do? And that's going to be huge when we go to the next part of this and you're trying to put down your story all together. Like I said, we're not going to be doing this live, so I'm going to go ahead and move on, but you can pause here if you need to in order to think about some of these things when you're writing them down. So now we're going to start crafting that story. So we're going to spend the next, 7 minutes learning about how to craft the story. And this will be a really good chance for you guys to keep working on that piece of paper, and we're going to start crafting that. So crafting your story, a really good way to start it is to think of it as a series of questions that your audience is going to ask. When you initially go up to talk to someone, they're going to ask you questions about what you're doing. Let's say the person is a very engaged individual and they're really curious about what it is. So they're going to want to know what it is, what impact, what program you are running, what organization mission you have, and what goals you have as an organization. What is it? Why is it important? That is the first one of the initial things that you want to talk about. That could be the challenge, where you're showing conflict in your story, because that immediately shows why it is important, because that's the conflict that everyone wants to try and avoid or try to come up with the solutions with. So why is it important? And then what's happening with it? What are you doing about it? What can we do about it as an audience? And then you show them the solutions. What are the solutions? What can I do about it? And so that's where you just really kind of bring them through all the different things. So those series of questions align very well with how a story is being told. You set the scene. What is it? You set the conflict. Why is it important? You set your characters. What is happening with it? You have your rising action. What are you doing about it? You have your climax. What can we do about it? And then the end of the film, the end of the art project, the end of the photo story, the end of the song, the end of the poem, the end of the comedy routine ends with the call to action on a hopeful note. So in order to do this, we're going to do a storyboard. And so really you just draw it out and you put these questions on a timeline, and when you think you're going to have them show up in your story. And so you're going to set, when the scene is set, you're going to introduce your characters, you're going to identify the problem, your solutions, and then that's when you ask your audience for help. So this is it. So this is what an early storyboard could look like. So you're going to have like a quick timeline. So you're going to draw a line on a piece of paper, an intro and an outro, and you're going to drop these little questions that we just had on the previous slide on this little timeline. So setting the scene, what is it? The setting could be on the beach, it could be in the city, it could be, in a shelter, it could be really just anywhere the scene, wherever your work is happening, that's kind of where you're setting it up. So that's the scene, you're setting up the scene, you're immediately answering the question, what is it, what's happening? And then you can use shots of that scene, or you can replicate that scene through some sort of art form. And then the next thing is, what is happening? And so that's kind of where your characters enter the scene, what's happening with the project that you're trying to convey. And then you have your challenges that you bring up, the challenges that the characters are facing. What is it that makes their day-to-day life difficult? What are the things that your solutions are going to be addressing with their lives? And then you just go through all of those different questions, and you think about the answers to those questions in your own mind and how it impact, or how it's connected to the work that you're doing, where you're doing it, where your audience is, what your audience understands, and then you put it all on that nice timeline right there so that you could really understand how it all kind of fits together. And then from there, after that timeline, you can start doing the classic storyboard where you have the little squares and you're writing out the scenes and everything. It's going to look so different for everybody because not everyone's going to do a video. Some people are going to do a painting or a series of paintings or a series of art or a poem or something. And so that timeline helps kind of inform that story so that you can stretch it out from a beginning to an end. And so that really conveys what you're doing. So the activity associated with this is that you're going to be doing a very similar timeline on your piece of paper, and you already have the answers to your questions written out on your paper. You've got all the scenes, the settings, the characters, the audience, all of that kind of stuff right above. So you write this timeline down, you look at these questions, you fill it in there, and then that's how you come up with your timeline. And that could start working with your story. And so that's kind of how it all goes. And like I said, since we don't necessarily have a full group, and this is going to be um, viewed after the fact, if you want to send me your timelines or your stories, feel free to reach out. My email is justin@runningwild.media. You can also visit our runningwild.media website. You can leave us a message on our form. And if you have any questions about anything, telling a story, how to tell a story, or if you're stuck on anything that you're trying to do, feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to help you.